Howdy folks! Today's lesson is going to be on how to do scattering, and specifically it's going to be scattering using particles. So today's example is going to be as if you had like a blobby canopy and you just want to like scatter leaves all over it. Obviously this could work for like if you have rocks you want to scatter on the ground, or I don't know, any number of things, but leaves is the most common, so we'll get going with that. So in order to begin tweaking particles, we need to actually create the particle system. So let's go to the particle tab, press plus, and by default it's set to emitter. So the main difference between emitter and hair is like emitter is best for like VFX things like smoke or fire, like stuff that is more ethereal and non-physical, and it's more like an element, so to speak. Hair is really good even if you're not doing hair, even if you're scattering rocks or leaves or anything like that. Hair is a lot more ideal for anything where it's like a physical object that you need to scatter on a surface. If it's, yeah, like I said, so if it's more of like plasma or an element or particles or whatever, then classic emitter. Otherwise, you want to use hair. From here, the number is generally exceptionally high for scattering leaves, so I'm just going to drop it to 100 just to lower the scene for a little bit while we set up the particle settings to be correct. So by default, the hair length is set to 4 meters. In order to display the leaves accurately, a 1-to-1 scale, meaning the leaf shape or like the size that they spawn on the surface. Like so if the leaves are this big, I want them to spawn the same size. Generally speaking, just because it's easier to control like how big it actually is. So step one to that is setting hair length to 1 meter. And then source is kind of where it's coming from. We don't have to worry about this too much right now. We just want to get it set up so that we can actually see the leaves. So moving on down, under render, there is render as path, and that is why we see these straight lines, but we don't want to do path. In this separate collection, I have set up leaves, and I've already got 3 variations. So it's like, it's literally just the same leaf, but I've put some simple deforms on it. It's a very, very simple leaf, geometry-wise. And yeah, just some little varieties with simple deform to shake it up. It's a couple different colors just so it's easier to see. Anyway, moving back to particles. So let's go back to this tab. Instead of path, we're going to pick collection, instance collection, and then choose leaves. So because I've made the hair length 1 meter, they're now like extremely tiny because the scale by default is 0.05. If you also set this to 1, then you'll see like the accurate scale. And you can change, it's pretty easy to update the scale from that point. Like if these are, maybe this is feeling a little big now, I could probably scale this down. Another thing we'll notice is they're all kind of like aiming in one direction. So in order to fix that, there is object rotation that we need to account for. So now it's going to use the actual rotation of these objects in space. But the thing is, for all other, like generally speaking in Blender, Z-axis is up. Particles are specifically the only thing where Y up, Y, like positive Y is actually up. So let's just show our translator so it's easier to see. R, Y, 90. And then now that they're off to the side, doing this in object mode, the leaves are actually pointed straight out now. So that's more what we want. So that's just an initial pass. Let's start to refine some features a little bit to get like a slightly better result. This is when it starts to get finicky. The initial setup is kind of the easy part, and now it gets a little noodly. So there's a few different options in terms of like where they spawn. So for this example, I'm fine with it spawning all over. If you had, for example, this is actually pretend this is a bush and it's not a canopy. Maybe it's actually resting on the ground. And maybe we don't want the bottom ones to spawn. So we'll just create a vertex group. Just call it spawn. Go back to our settings, and then under, I always have to find it. So in terms of under vertex groups, density, choose spawn, and now it's only going to pick those angles. There's still a few kind of on the bottom. I wouldn't really worry too much about stragglers. There's other ways to fix it as long as it's like mostly where you want. You do have the option, of course, of reducing where you're spawning, and that'll kind of like increase the area up a little bit. Kind of depends what you're looking for. So let's go back to the particle settings actually. So it's spawning where we want, it's the correct size, and it's oriented out for the most part. The rotation obviously is being a little bit more controlled by the individual leaves, and the design of your leaf too will obviously change what this ends up looking like. but let's just kind of tweak with a few of these. So random order is kind of a good one to like turn on and off. I want to get like a relatively even coverage, so having it off seems to do a little better. Faces, will pretty much always use faces. Vertices ends up being like really evenly lined up. Now, if you're doing like rows of corn or something, and you do need something spawning at regular intervals, the vertices is probably your option. But if you want it to look a little more natural, faces is generally the way to go. Even distribution can help. Generally, when I'm spawning with particles, again, I do want like full coverage on something so they don't stack up as much. So enabling that is generally helpful. I don't really see anything wrong there. That's good. So that's more, there's not that many options for spawning, but there's a few things we can do after the fact once you get it pretty close. Is more the objective just to get it pretty close right now because we're still getting a lot of penetrations and stuff like that. But we're going to try our best to mitigate that. Since it is a particle, penetrations are kind of unavoidable, but we'll go through and we'll see. So the number isn't bad. Maybe I can drop it a little bit. Yeah, maybe like a little bit more, 80. And then maybe I can get a better seed too, because it's bunching a little bit. You can kind of cycle through and see if there's a seed that's going to give you a better result. You're looking for ones that are obviously, oh, this one's actually pretty good. That's like decent coverage, not too much penetrate. Like obviously there's a decent amount, but the other thing that's happening to you is like the rotation isn't really changing at all. So we need to find, I always have a hard time finding it. Okay, so under now I'm just going through all the things and trying to find okay, I'm missing it. It seems like there's a ton of settings. There's only a few that we actually care about, so it's just a matter. Let's just go from top to bottom and we'll just go through all of them. So number is set, seed is set, length is fine, segments irrelevant because we're not working with hair. Face, yep. Jittered. Oh yeah, okay, so this can also potentially help changing between jittered and random. Um, yeah, jittered looks like it's a better distribution, but random looks a little bit better with rotation. I'm just gonna keep it with jittered for now. Can kind of test this to see if we get a better result. Not really. Particles faces. Yeah, particles per face. This, yeah, again, this is sort of a random setting that's like sort of helping, but not really. Can only get it so good when it's a particle like this. So scale randomness. This can also kind of help to make it look a little more jittery. We want the whole collection. Could say pick random. Again, that's not really. It's kind of it's like the more or less the same amount of penetration. It's sort of helping, but not really. Uh, Object rotation we want. Object scale we want. Yeah, this is more, yeah, if you need specific counts of things. I'm not too worried about that. Display as rendered, material, amount, show emitter. Oh yeah, if you want to see the base or not, you can turn that on or off. In the case of children, this is for hair really. So basically what this will allow you to do is if you have one strand and you have children, it'll just like spawn a bunch of extras with a similar setting with that one strand. So you don't have to create a bazillion strands to get the look of a bazillion strands. Again, that's not a setting we care about for object emission. And hair shape is also a thing we don't care about for object emission. Field weights, force weight settings, vertex groups, textures. Like, yeah, most of these don't really matter. I could have swore there was a setting for, oh, okay, all right, so this is why. All right, so if you are having trouble finding rotation settings, by default, advanced is checked off. You see it's adding velocity. Rotation is the critical one. So you have to enable it as well once you've found it, and then you can start to, there we go, randomize. So the phase is kind of like, it's hard to think of how to describe that. Sort of like the seed, I guess, but more to do with rotation than like a batch of things. And then you can randomize the phase, which can potentially help. I'll usually crank these like kind of high. And then this doesn't really seem to help that much in this case. It could help more if there was like actual hair, but phase is what you're looking for, and then you're just gonna want to tweak and find something that's gonna kind of help. But once you've noodled with it and you find a setting that's like kind of helping, um, honestly, I maybe want to even go higher with this. Uh, I'd prefer a little too much than not enough because removing is easier than adding. So you're just kind of looking for general distribution, penetrations, like I was saying. Okay, like this one's not too bad. It's pretty evenly spaced. There's quite a few that are like kind of messed up, but yeah, I just want to at least have enough on it. Okay, that's getting a little better. A little better. Okay, that one's working pretty good because okay, so let's say this is as far as, we want to go with most of these settings. There's one more thing we can do to try and control the shape. So after you've messed with the phase, try and find a rotation that works, try and find like maybe a random scale that looks natural for your object once you've gone through some seeds and tried different numbers and like you've gotten it as close as you can, you're kind of hitting a wall. The next step is if you hit Control Tab, you can go into Mode and you want to go into Particle Edit. So in order to see the particles a little bit easier, because right now they're just set to strand at the top left of my screen here, if you pick this middle one, you'll get full control over like the entire strand. That's not really what I want for canopies. You actually just want the end of it to be editable. And then what looks nice for canopies and vegetation in general is most trees tend to have a flow to them, a certain direction that the leaves will kind of go in. It's pretty standard for up to be the direction. By default, you're just set to comb, which works pretty well with having things go up. And then same settings as for most things. Shift is the... Oh, I lied. I was going to say shift is for smooth, but that doesn't work for this. In order to smooth it, we actually want to pick just the smooth button. I lied again. Length, puff. Okay, yeah, puff is the one. So what I like to do is you just take comb and you just really pull it as far as you can in the direction that you want to go in and just like maximize pushing it. Now a lot of them are kind of getting crushed up on the side and stuff like that, and there's not a lot of breathing room. I just like to take puff at that point and just kind of like tap a little bit around it just to try to bring it a little bit back more to neutral, relax it a bit more, but you still have that overall orientation direction happening, kind of like affect the bottom ones. Unfortunately, to see your result, you're going to have to go back into object mode. So now we can see like there's kind of like this type of thing happening with the leaves, which is just like a little more interesting to look at. Another option for particle edit is if you press L and you are to select the whole thing. I know there's a way to... There's definitely a way to grab the whole thing without the bottom, with the bottom as well. Of course, super good video, very tutorial-y. Such tutorial, wow. Select. I know there's a way. I know there's a way. All right, well, assuming there is definitely a way. If somebody's really curious for the answer, I'll definitely track it down and upload it in the comments. I don't know if anybody's gonna care. Just pretending you couldn't find the way and you wanted to edit it beyond, like a little bit further. Like say this got you like most of the way there, because like honestly, even if you can edit these out, like even if you do move these and separate them a little bit, it's still going to be kind of hard to gauge where it's sitting in the 3D space. Like regardless, you're going to have to go back and forth between these two states. So if you do need it to be like 0 penetrations, let's say, even though you can, like I was attempting to show, you can move this whole thing and have the bottom follow. Again, I'm blanking on how to do that. Also, if you know, feel free to update in the comments with the answer. But that's actually not the best way to edit the leaves, in my opinion. The best way is if you go back to the modifier tab and you press convert, what this will do is just spawn instances of all those leaves that you had. Select your base because it still has a particle system active. Go here and then just disable it. You can just straight up delete it if you want. It doesn't really matter. We don't really need it at this point. The important thing is we have this now. So I recommend just shift right clicking, selecting one, shift S, selection of cursor, and just kind of spreading that out a little bit. You can grab some if they're just like penetrating, delete them. But it does save you a decent amount of time. Like it's a better solution than just completely doing this by hand. It's not as fast as like particle only. I'm sure GeoNodes would also have a much better way to handle something like this, but it's kind of like a hybrid solution that can kind of help. Less painful, but who knows. Let's just do, we'll just do this half here. But as long as you're keeping, you're using, I'm just hitting R and like basically just rotating by orientation, but using these hotkeys together with, especially if you set it to normal as well, then you can like, if you just want to like fold it down or something, you can just use those hotkeys. But even just like a few clicks here can get that relatively spaced out and looking decent. In another video, I will show say if you want to create, you know, scattering words. Say you want to scatter something and you want it to be like hand scattered, but it's like a large area and you don't want to like do the whole thing by hand, because if this was like a really big canopy or really small leaves, this might not be as viable to like create particles and then just like manually tweak it like this, because it can take a very long time. It depends what the result is that you need to get, but it can definitely be incredibly time consuming. But the nice thing I like about this, at least, is it sets up your particles as instances. So you edit one, you edit them all. So that can be a lot easier for surfacing. I definitely recommend if you are working in a place that has a surfacing department that you should UV these leaves before you collapse them down into one object. If your pipeline is, if that's how it works, kind of depends. Some pipelines might have the leaves as separate instances and assembled. Others might just collapse it down. But especially if yours collapses down, you should, just for surfacing's sake, just to make them happy. Okay, cool. Yeah, so that didn't take too long. It wasn't too bad. Definitely still faster, I would say, to use particles than doing this by hand. But if you want that hand touch of like it looking really natural and not penetrating, you kind of just have to do it by hand. There isn't really a magic answer for that, but the next solution I will show will hopefully be a little bit quicker if you did need to cover a large area. But yeah, that's how I would do it. If you had a smaller area to populate on, get started with particles, get that, use that to get you most of the way, and then do the rest by hand. And yeah, if you liked what I did, like, subscribe, and goodbye.